scaling up. That seems to be the mantra in AI right now. Bigger models, more data, more everything. But what if the real breakthrough, the next leap, isn't about looking up at massive LLMs? What if it's about looking down, at how life itself actually builds intelligence from the ground up?
It's a fascinating shift in perspective, yeah. And it centers on this computationally quite elegant framework called Neural Cellular Automata, NCAs for short.
Okay, NCA. So before we really dive deep today, let's just set the baseline. Most people probably know about cellular automata, right? Like Conway's Game of Life is the classic. How are these NCAs different from that simple grid world?
Right, good place to start. So classical CAs, like Conway's Game of Life, they operate on a grid, sure. But each cell's state, on or off, alive or dead, it changes based on fixed deterministic rules, like a rigid instruction manual that applies everywhere, always.
Okay, fixed rules. So the complexity emerges, but the underlying logic is static.
Exactly. You get these amazing emergent patterns, but the rules are set in stone. NCAs, they threw out that fixed rule book. Instead, each cell gets its own tiny trainable artificial neural network, an ANN.
An ANN, inside every cell in the grid.
Inside every cell. Think of it less like following an instruction and more like each cell having a little brain that learns usually through optimization techniques like gradient descent or even evolution sometimes.
So it's learning, not just executing.
Precisely. And the real insight here is that you don't need some central coordinator telling everything what to do. These purely local interactions, these little cell-to-cell chats based on what the ANNs learn, they're enough. They scale up to create coordinated system-wide behavior that actually works towards a goal.
That sounds incredibly biological. The
Yeah.
decentralized control is sort of life's signature, isn't it?
It really is. And that's what we're going to explore today, why NCAs are such a powerful model for biological self-organization. We'll get into this idea the sources call the multiscale competency architecture, and we'll see how this approach is leading to some surprisingly efficient AI that can actually compete with the big players on certain tasks, but at a tiny fraction of the computational cost.
Okay, let's unpack that multiscale competency architecture. It sounds a bit academic, maybe. What does it actually mean in, biological terms? How does life exhibit this?
Right. It basically just reflects how life organizes itself in layers. It's a nested hierarchy, you could say. Think about your own body. It's not run by one single program, is it?
Definitely not. Feels like chaos sometimes.
Huh. Well, maybe organized chaos. You've got molecules maintaining balance homeostasis. Cells have goals like differentiating into skin or nerve cells. Tissues work together to form organs. The whole organism tries to survive. Competency, the ability to get something done, exists at all these different scales all at once.
Okay, so goals within goals within goals.
Yeah.
And NCAs mirror this because each cell, with its little ANN brain, is just looking at its neighbors.
Exactly. It's only making decisions based on local info.
But somehow, all those local decisions add up to achieve the big picture goal, like growing a specific shape.
That's the magic of it, yeah. They aren't explicitly programmed with the final blueprint. They're often trained with an objective function like minimize the difference between your current state and this target image.
Okay.
And we see this really clearly in computational morphogenesis, basically, growing shapes. NCAs have been trained to solve classic developmental puzzles like the French flag problem.
Where different cell types have to arrange themselves correctly based on position.
Right. And they can reliably grow quite complex 2D target images, like a lizard or maybe an emoji, starting from literally just one single seed cell.
So it's not about storing the image, it's about storing the rules for growth. The local rules that, when followed everywhere, just happen to produce the lizard.
You got it. The learned ANN in each cell, it embodies what the researchers call the generative genomic bottleneck. Think about your own genome. It doesn't explicitly map out every single cell in your body, right? That'd be impossible.
Way too much data.
Exactly. Instead, your genome holds the compressed, efficient rules for development. The rules that guide self-assembly through local interactions and adaptive changes. The NCA's network parameters are like that compact genome. It's the algorithm to generate the structure, not the structure itself.
Okay, that makes sense. But what really blew me away in the sources was the resilience. Biological things don't just grow, they heal. Can NCAs do that too?
Oh, absolutely. And this is where they really start to look different from, say, standard generative models. During the training process, researchers can deliberately damage the growing pattern, like just erase a whole chunk of cells.
Okay, simulating injury in real time.
Right. And the NCA system doesn't just, fall apart. It learns not just the rules for growing the target shape, but also the rules for repairing it. It learns to detect the damage, regenerate the missing parts, and restore the original morphology.
Wow. So it's like a digital axolotl regrowing its limb right there on the screen.
That's a perfect analogy. That ability to regenerate, to be robust against damage, is such a key feature of complex life. Think planaria, axolotls.
So
NCAs capture this almost naturally because the intelligence, the rules are distributed, lose a part. The remaining parts still know what to do. They can reorganize and fill in the gap.
that robustness is just incredible. Okay, so if these models are so good at capturing self-repair, this must have implications beyond just cool simulations. Where does this connect to, say, engineering or even medicine?
It absolutely does. That regenerative capability, it translates directly into areas like soft robotics. Researchers have used this NCA framework, for instance, to design simulated robots built out of voxels like 3D pixels.
Okay, so modular robots?
Yeah, things like little bipeds or tripods. And they train them using NCA principles so that these simulated robots can autonomously regenerate their structure after being damaged.
How well does that work, though? I mean,
hmm
regenerating the shape is one thing, but can they still function? Can the little tripod still walk after being repaired?
That's the critical question, isn't it? And the results are, well, promising, but still developing. Structurally, they can get incredibly close sometimes, achieving like 99% similarity to the original shape after regeneration.
That's impressive.
It is. Functionally, though, it's often partial recovery. Maybe the locomotion, the walking ability only recovers to, say, 67% in some experiments. So getting the shape right seems easier than perfectly restoring complex function.
Right, there's more to walking than just having legs in the right place.
Exactly. But still, achieving even partial functional recovery using only these local self-organizing rules after significant damage, that's a huge step for building resilient machines that might operate in unpredictable places.
And it's not just simulations, right? Sources mentioned a connection to actual physical biobots,
Yeah,
the xenobots.
that's probably the most striking real-world bridge so far. These NCA-like control ideas were actually used as computational models in silico guides, essentially to help the researchers figure out how to design and build novel living machines.
We should probably clarify for listeners, xenobots and later anthrobots, these aren't metal robots. They're built from living cells like frog skin cells or human tracheal cells.
Correct, they're tiny, self-powered biological machines. The NCA framework provided insights into how collections of simple cells could be encouraged to work together, to self-assemble into forms that could perform tasks, like moving things around. It helped guide the actual biological construction.
That's taking bio-inspiration to a whole new level, using the model to help build the real thing. Okay, let's shift gears slightly. The sources also talked about modeling aging using NCAs. How does a decentralized system like this capture something as complex as biological decline?
It approaches aging in a really interesting way, not just as, accumulated damage or genetic errors, but more as a loss of organizational coherence. The NCA simulations frame aging as a kind of loss of goal-directedness in morphospace.
Okay, morphospace, let's break that down. What is that?
Think of morphospace as like the abstract map of all possible shapes or forms a system could take. A healthy organism, or a healthy NCA pattern, stays within a specific, stable region of this map, its target shape, its anatomical homeostasis.
Got it. It's healthy state.
Right. Aging, then, in this view, is when the system starts to lose its way on that map. The collective intelligence breaks down. The local rules encoded in the cell ANNs might become less reliable, or the communication between them gets noisy. So the system drifts away from that stable, healthy configuration.
Even if the underlying genome, the ANN parameters, hasn't fundamentally changed.
Potentially, yes. It's a failure of the collective ability to maintain the target state. The system forgets how to get back to its goal, even if the goal itself is still implicitly defined.
That's a really different way to think about aging. Less about broken parts, more about lost information or coordination.
Exactly. And the hopeful part of this research is that it suggests there might be dormant regenerative potential still lurking in aged tissues. The capacity to self-correct might still be there, just inaccessible. And maybe targeted interventions could reactivate that collective intelligence rather than just trying to patch individual molecular errors.
Fascinating. And the last piece of this biological modeling puzzle mentioned was Bioelectricity.
Ah, yes, very important. Bioelectric fields and ion flows act like a kind of software layer controlling development and regeneration. NCAs have been used to model this quite effectively.
How so?
For example, simulating how tadpole facial structures develop. If you disrupt the natural bioelectric patterns, the face develops incorrectly. But the simulation showed how applying specific corrective bioelectric cues could guide the cells modeled by the NCA to reorganize and achieve the correct facial structure. It shows NCAs can capture how these electrical signals guide the biological hardware.
Okay, so NCAs are clearly powerful for modeling life, its growth, repair, even its decline, but that seems messy, biological. How does this translate into the world of AI, which we often think of as clean, logical, maybe even brittle? Why would building AI from these tiny interacting units be effective?
Well, it turns out that decentralization offers some serious advantages, especially in robustness and efficiency. We already touched on the robotics example, but even in pure control tasks, like controlling simulated microswimmers in complex fluid dynamics.
Little virtual swimmers.
Yeah.
Hmm.
The NCA-based controllers they developed were incredibly robust. They learned policies that worked even if the swimmers changed size, and they kept swimming effectively even when, like, large chunks of their muscles or actuators were disabled. A centralized controller would likely just fail completely in that scenario.
Okay, so robust control is one thing, but what about higher level stuff? Reasoning, problem solving, the kind of thing we expect from general intelligence.
That's where it gets really interesting with the ARC challenge, the abstract reasoning corpus. It's a benchmark designed specifically to test abstract reasoning and, crucially, generalization from very few examples. You have to figure out the underlying pattern or rule from just a couple of input-output pairs.
A tough test for AI. And how did NCAs do? The ARC NCA models.
They did remarkably well. The sources highlight that they performed competitively with some very large, sophisticated models, even mentioning comparisons to things like ChatGPT 4.5 on certain ARC tasks.
Whoa, wait. Tiny distributed NCAs competing with a massive language model on abstract reasoning. How?
It comes down to the way they learn and the resources they need. The ARC NCAs achieved the strong performance using a tiny, tiny fraction of the compute power and data compared to the large models. We're talking orders of magnitude less cost.
Okay, but how do they generalize so well from just 2 or 3 examples? That seems like the magic trick.
It's partly due to the constraint of being local. The same learned rule, the same ANN parameters, has to exist in every cell and work correctly regardless of its position on the grid. Cell A needs to apply the rule just as well as cell B, using only its local neighborhood.
Spatial invariance forces a general solution.
Exactly. It forces the system to learn a deep, context-independent rule that applies universally across the problem space. It can't just memorize specific configurations. It has to find the underlying logic. It's an incredibly efficient way to learn generalizable rules. This collective intelligence, built from the bottom up, is proving to be surprisingly powerful for problem solving.
You know, when you describe it like a grid of identical processing units interacting locally to produce global behavior, it sounds.
Hey,
Well, it sounds a lot like how we think the brain cortex is organized.
doesn't it? It's a very compelling parallel. The human neocortex is often described as this sort of 2D sheet made up of repeating computational units, the cortical columns. Each column gets input, processes it locally, and interacts with its neighbors.
Like an NCA grid.
Very much like an NCA grid where each cell has its own trainable ANN. It makes NCAs a really strong candidate model for understanding cortical computation. And it raises this really deep question. Are the mechanisms underlying biological morphogenesis, the way a lizard grows its shape, fundamentally related to the mechanisms underlying cognition, the way a brain thinks? Both seem to rely on local rules scaling up.
That's a wild thought. And it connects to this broader idea mentioned in the sources, models within models. What's that about?
It's the idea that biological systems, maybe all complex adaptive systems, are built hierarchically from components that are themselves models of their environment. An enzyme models its substrate, a cell models its niche, a tissue models its function within the organ.
Okay.
Each level acts as an agent, pursuing local goals based on its internal model, and these actions contribute to the goals of the level above. NCAs capture this beautifully. Each cell's ANN is an embodied model of its local neighborhood, acting to fulfill its objective, which in turn contributes to the whole system's objective. It's layers of agency repurposed and built upon each other.
It's a powerful concept. Okay, we've seen the potential, the biological parallels, the surprising AI results. But where are the roadblocks? What are the current limitations of NCAs, and where is the research heading next?
Yeah, absolutely critical questions. There are definitely limitations. Right now, NCAs are still mostly toy models when it comes to biology. Scaling them up to simulate something with the complexity of a real human organ, like a kidney, that's computationally very, very hard.
Still too complex, even for this efficient architecture.
Right. And maybe even more critically for actual medical applications, it's really difficult to map the internal states of an NCA cell, its learned representations, onto real, measurable biological data. Like, what does activation pattern X in the simulated cell actually correspond to in terms of protein expression or gene activity in a real cell?
So we can make it grow a shape that looks like a kidney, but we can't easily use it to predict exactly how a real kidney cell will behave
Yeah,
in response to a drug, for example.
precisely. That gap limits their direct predictive power for things like precision medicine right now. So, scaling and biological grounding are major challenges.
And the sources hinted at a possible path forward, maybe a hybrid approach, merging NCAs with other AI techniques.
Yes, exactly. There's a fascinating connection between NCAs and another major class of generative models, denoising diffusion models, which are behind many state-of-the-art image generation AIs.
How are they related? They seem quite different on the surface.
Well, think about what both do. Diffusion models start with random noise and iteratively refine it, step by step, removing noise according to learned rules until a structured image emerges. NCAs start with a simple seed or a disorganized state and iteratively refine it, step by step, applying local rules until a structured morphology emerges. Both are iterative refinement processes.
Ah, okay. I see the parallel. So the idea is to combine them.
Potentially, yeah. Future systems might leverage the strengths of both. You could get the spatial awareness, the distributed computation, the self-repair benefits of NCAs, combined with maybe the powerful temporal supervision and hierarchical generation capabilities that diffusion models excel at. It could be a really potent mix.
Interesting. And one last concept that came up was this idea of a critical sweet spot, finding a balance point for these systems.
Right. This relates to the idea of criticality in complex systems operating at the edge of chaos, basically. Research suggests that if you train NCAs to operate right near this critical point, balance between being too rigid and too chaotic.
Like water right at the freezing point, sensitive but structured.
That's a great analogy. If they operate there, they seem to learn much more efficiently, and they become more adaptable to changes. It suggests this critical dynamic might be a fundamental principle for optimizing decentralized systems, whether they're biological cells or artificial agents. It connects computational power directly back to biological principles of organization.
So wrapping this up, this deep dive really shows that neural cellular automata aren't just some niche curiosity. They're a powerful, computationally lean framework. They let us model the core principles of how life builds itself, that multi-scale competency, and they unlock potential for things like self-healing robots, while also offering a surprisingly efficient path towards generalized AI for tasks like abstract reasoning on the ARC benchmark.
Absolutely. And it creates this really productive loop, doesn't it? We use NCAs to understand information processing in biological collectives, how cells cooperate. Then we take those biological design principles and use them to build better AI that's inherently more adaptable, more resilient, maybe even more collaborative and aligned with complex goals.
It's a true synergy between understanding life and building intelligence. So we've talked quite a bit about how NCAs demonstrate intelligence emerging from simple local rules, scaling up to create complex, competent systems. Let me leave you, our listener, with this thought. If biological agents at every single scale, from a protein folding to a cell dividing to a tissue forming, if they all act as these embodied models of their little worlds, constantly pursuing local goals, well, are we ourselves, our minds, our consciousness, just the highest layer we currently know of in one giant nested self-organizing neural cellular automata?